honoring Revolutionary War patriot Samuel Filson, Jr. Let's have an invocation at this time. Eternal God, with hearts filled with love and gratitude, we ask you to ask thy blessing on this marker placed in honor of Samuel Filson, an American Revolutionary War patriot. The unequal liberties enjoyed in America today are the legacy of brave, strong patriots. Their deep faith and belief in thy guidance, together with the hope of living in freedom, fortified them throughout the war for independence. We give thanks, O Lord, for thy many blessings and ask that thy Holy Spirit be with us always. May we never forget those who fought for the freedom of their new country. Amen.
Amen.
At this time, if you'll join me, if you'll stand, those of you that can, I will do the Pledge to the United States of America. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
At this time, we're going to hear from Randy Filson, a descendant of Samuel Filson.
Good afternoon. My name is Samuel Filson, and I was born in 1757 in Chester County, Pennsylvania. My parents died of the plague when I was 9 years old, so I had to go live with my grandparents and my uncles. My grandfather was John Filson, and he came to America in 1737 from Northern Ireland. He was a Scottish-Irish lowlands farmer, and he and my grandfather and uncles all came to America, and they settled in the Brandywine Valley of Chester County, Pennsylvania. They were large landowners with big farms, and I lived with my grandfather and my uncles. My uncle was Davison Filson, and he had a son who's my cousin, John Filson. Now, some of you probably have heard of John Filson. He left the farm and started teaching at North Academy, and then was voted president of a New Jersey college. That college today is Princeton. After the war, John went and he bought some Western land grants that the government was handing out to soldiers. Many of the soldiers did want to move from their land and go west. John left Pennsylvania and went to Lexington, Kentucky, where he taught the first year at Transylvania College. After that, John started talking to different ones in the area, asking them about this great state of Kentucky. He wanted to know all about it. Three men he talked to you might have heard of: John Harrod, Levi Todd, and a man named Daniel Boone. Now, he wanted to know all about Kentucky for a lot of reasons. He had acquired 13,000 acres in the surrounding areas. But he also wanted to write a book, and he did with the help of these three men. In fact, all three of these men verified each and every word in his book. The book was entitled The Discovery, Settlement, and Present State of Kentucky. Daniel Boone sat down with him and gave him the words for a whole chapter to write down about all of his adventures while he was in the state of Kentucky. John went back to Maryland with his manuscripts, along with a map that he had drawn of Kentucky. And he went back to Maryland and he had it published. And he charged $1.50 for the book and a copy of the map. And it sold mostly in the United States, but it was very popular in Europe, especially in France and Germany, as people there used it as a tour guide to let them know all about the rivers and streams, the heavy game, the Indian tribes, the salt licks, and all the fertile soil that was in our state of Kentucky. After that, he went back to Lexington and he tried to start a seminary college, but it fell through. Then one day he was approached by a friend, a colonel, Robert Patterson in the Revolutionary War, and his friend Matthias Denman. And they wanted John Filson to join them and to start a new town on the Ohio River. So John, with them and 25 other men, got on flatboats and went down the Licking River all the way to the mouth of the Ohio. There they crossed the river, and John surveyed and laid out a town. And they couldn't come up with a name. So since John was an educator, and he knew French and Latin, he came up with the name Lausanville, a French and Latin term for across from River Valley City. As we all know today, that name was changed to Cincinnati, but it has a Revolutionary War connection, because later it was changed to Cincinnati and named after the Society of Cincinnati, which was a group of Revolutionary War officers who were formed and started by General George Washington. Sad to say, my cousin was later killed while searching through other areas to start another settlement by Indians along the Miami River. John and I grew up together working the farms, but he liked education, and I liked getting my hands dirty. So I grew up on the farm and met a lady by the name of Heron, and we got married, and we started having children. And we farmed the land for years, but one day, in 1775, I heard that delegates from all 13 colonies were going to Philadelphia to write a declaration, not just any declaration, but a declaration of independence, because we were tired of the British. We were tired of being ruled by a king. We were tired of taxation over stamps, tea, sugar. We wanted to be our own nation, independent of British rule. So, in 1778, I traveled to White Plains, Maryland, and I joined the Continental Army. I was a private in 7th Regiment of Maryland. Now back then, the pay for a soldier in the Revolutionary War was $6.25 a month, which averaged out to about $75 a year. But there were deductions. There was money sent back home for family expenses. There was the price of your uniform, the price of your arms, and there were deductions of fines. So most times you took home about $20, $25 a year. But there were two other ways that soldiers were compensated. A one-time bounty, which would be determined at the end of the war. And the one that I thought of, Western land grants. That after a soldier had fought in the Revolutionary War, he would be awarded land. So I joined. The first years were tough because the war had already started, with the battles of Lexington and Concord. And many of you have heard that that was going to be a surprise attack on Lexington and Concord, if not for Paul Revere, who had snuck into a British camp and overheard their plans, and snuck and got a rowboat and rowed across the St. Charles River and got a horse and ran through the town of Lexington and Concord, warning everyone of the attack by the British. There were a lot of wars that we lost. Wars of Trenton, New York, Boston. But these wars didn't show the true determination of our soldiers, because in each and every battle there would be far more British casualties. There would be far more British prisoners. The turning point of the war was the Battle of Saratoga. There the British had put together a plan to attack our soldiers from three sides. But because their supply wagon had been hit, communication was muffled. And all three of them showed up at different days. And one British commander who wanted to be gun-ho had his troops charge, thinking that the other two British troops were already in place, but they weren't. And a man by the name of Benedict Arnold, without his captain's orders, yelled, "Charge! Give me victory or death!" And we took complete control of the war. Sad to say, Benedict Arnold became a traitor and started fighting for the British. But that was the turning point of the war. We took over 5,000 prisoners. But we had another enemy. And the British used that too. And that was the enemy of starvation, cold weather, and disease. When I first started in the Revolutionary War, a soldier's rations included a half a pound of dried beef. And at least one time a week we got fish. A half a pound of dried pork. A pound of loaf of bread. A cup of dried beans or a cup of dried peas. We'd get a pint of milk. And we'd get a quart of spruce beer. Or if they didn't have it, we'd get a half cup of rum or whiskey. But as supply wagons couldn't get to us, weather got bad, many of our soldiers starved to death. You were lucky to have some bread, some bean water, and maybe some water from a creek or a stream. And then there was the cold. In the winter it got so bitter cold, you would see soldiers still fighting and half of their uniforms be tore off, and you'd see bare skin. And some you'd look down and they didn't even have shoes or boots. Many froze to death. But worst of all was disease. Yellow fever. But more worse than that was the smallpox. Now the British had used this because the British, they had already inoculated their troops before they went into battle 2 weeks prior. Wasn't a problem for the British. But it was a problem for us because we hadn't been inoculated. General Washington was afraid to inoculate us because there were so many sick. He was afraid that it would just make more sick, and we needed the numbers. But it got so bad at Valley Forge that he had to order inoculations. But thank God it worked. And we started winning battles again. In 1779, I was promoted to sergeant under the command of Captains Lloyd Beale and Charles Beatty. I was honored to be awarded this promotion. We fought in many battles, like the Battle of the Mountain Ridge, but I was wounded at Fort Pitt in the knee, and a month later I was discharged, and I hated it because I still wanted to fight with my brothers in arms. I moved back to White Plains, Maryland, and I met a lady who became my second wife, Mary Cooper. And her and my other children started raising and having more children. And we worked the land. A few months after our marriage, we got bad news that her dad had been killed at the bloody Battle of Cowpens. But we rejoiced a few months later after that when we heard that British General Cornwallis had surrendered at Yorktown in Virginia, that he was surrounded by General Washington and the French army, and the French naval fleet had just got there on the Atlantic. This would be the last major battle of the Revolutionary War. But it wasn't over. There were still a few other battles that would linger on till 1783. But the Battle of Yorktown was in 1781. In fact, one of the last battles of the Revolutionary War was just a few miles from here, at the Battle of Blue Licks, where we lost a lot of Kentucky militiamen to the Indian and the Redcoats. It was a costly war. When we started, for the 7 to 8 years, there was over 220,000 soldiers. Only about 60,000 would be fighting at one time. There was over 145,000 of colonists and farmers, people like you and I, who went out and fought side by side. And I'm proud to say there was over 5,000 African American slaves. Some of them freed slaves from the North, but some of them were still slaves who fought with us side by side. And some gained freedom after the war was over. In fact, one of the first casualties and one of the first heroes of the American Revolutionary War was a man by the name of Crispus Attucks. He was shot and killed, the very first casualty that we had. After the war, I went, and my wife Mary and I worked the farms, made a living, and a few years later we received mail from the U.S. government, and in that mail was our land grant. And that's what I've been waiting to see. So we hated to leave family and friends, but we loaded up our wagons, and my wife and my children, we all headed west. A new adventure, a new life. And we landed right here, in this beautiful place, God's green earth, Fleming County. What a beautiful place it was. Rolling hills, a beautiful valley, 2 natural springs for drinking water and to keep our food cold. There was plenty of grazing land for our livestock, plenty of fertile soil for our crops. And then there was Fox Creek that provided not only water for our livestock, but irrigation, and when it was up, provided transportation to haul our goods, our crops, and logs down the creek to the Licking River to be sold. Then in 1804, we built one of the largest 2-story log cabins in all of Fleming County. Well, we had to. We had 16 kids. We worked hard. We farmed the land hard. We had many cattle, many livestock. But we also played hard. When we would throw parties, well, they would last for days. In fact, my sons would kill as many as 30 deer. And there would be people coming from all over this area and Rowan and Fleming counties with their banjos, their fiddles, their guitars, and we had the best time in the world. You could hear music all up and down these valleys and hills. It was a great life. And in 1829, the good people of Fleming County, they elected me the first sheriff of Fleming County. It was a great honor. The only negative thing that happened during my term was once 2 men got in an argument, and don't think he meant it, but one picked up a rock and struck the other fellow in the head and caused his death. It went to trial. The jury found him guilty. And the judge said, death by hanging. I really didn't want to do it. In fact, in the local newspaper, I offered $30 for any man that would come and take my place, and I got no offers. So I had to do my duty. It's been a great life. I've loved living in this area, breathing this God's air. I've had my sons and workers on the farm go up to the mountains and bring down these large rocks and these stones to mark my resting spot. And I've asked my children to bury me in my Revolutionary War uniform that I wore proudly. And I've had them scribe on this headstone these words. My race is run. My glass is done. My resting spot is here. This rock was got to mark the spot. Fear man should dig too near. Today I'd like to read for you a tribute that was written by my great-great-great-grandson. He is retired Naval Lieutenant Chaplain Terry A. Roberts, a cousin. And I want to read this tribute today, not only in tribute of what Terry wrote, but in tribute for all who served in the Revolutionary War and who fought and died in that war for our freedom, for our independence. I hope I can give it justice to Terry's words. The title is, When the Smoke Cleared, I Was Still Standing. I've heard tell that a redcoat can fire his flint rock 3, maybe 4 times a minute. Some say they can make a mark a man at 175 paces. That's a fur piece to fire a caliber round ball. When the smoke had cleared, I was still standing. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for my sad fellows. Many have fallen to my left and to my right. Some are dead, some even worse. 50 paces is mighty close to stand for a whole minute. Then the captain's. I can hear his call in my ears and the smoke that's in my eyes. Make ready! Fire! I take no aim as I shoulder my musket, and a misty red mass stands before me. I cock the hammer. I turn my head and I fire. A slow, sudden, blunt explosion follows as a billow of smoke engulfs my foe. I reach for another cartridge. I tear the paper with my teeth. I prime my pan. In vision and in unison, we draw our arms. I seat the powder and then the ball. Through the smoke and over the shouts of horror, we draw our guns once again as our captain waves his sword and calls, "Make ready! Fire!" I can't say that through the smoke if any of my rounds ever found its mark. I fear for both. Musket rounds are whizzing and thudding all about my head. Men are screaming, cursing. Some are shouting prayers to heaven, all in this sulfur-filled air. But when the smoke had cleared, I was still standing. As a great grandson of Samuel Filson, along with all my family and friends that are here today, we would like to thank the daughters of the American Revolution for this great honor that they have bestowed on our ancestors. And in my heart, I truly believe if Samuel Filson was still here today, he would look up in the heavens and he'd thank his Heavenly Father, thanking him for the life that he had lived, for the family that he had loved, and for the opportunity, the privilege, and most of all the honor of serving in the Revolutionary War and be side by side with his brothers in arms and to be a part of a birth of a new nation, our nation, the United States of America. Thank you all for coming, and God bless you.